Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to my review for a film that is truly dear to my heart, from a franchise that's also truly dear to my heart. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about Mad Max. Now, I love this film so much. This is one of those movies that I could just watch a million times. As soon as the film finishes, I feel, a part of me just feels like popping it in again to watch again. There's just so many iconic scenes from this movie that are just truly unforgettable. Now, I didn't always feel like this. Like, today, I'm a huge fan of this film, but I wasn't always like this. Now, my introduction to the Mad Max series began with The Road Warrior, which is the sequel. And the reason for that is because I'm here in America, and initially in America, the first film in the series, Mad Max, was overlooked. So the studios, they treated the sequel, The Road Warrior, as if it were a standalone film, and basically they didn't promote it like it was Mad Max 2. Instead, they promoted it as its own thing, The Road Warrior. Right, and I was a little kid when The Road Warrior came out, and I was introduced to that film through my father. So, point being, for me, Mad Max was The Road Warrior. That's it. I didn't really know much about Mad Max. And I was a big fan of The Road Warrior. I love The Road Warrior. The Road Warrior is a masterpiece and easily one of the greatest action films ever made, and easily one of the greatest sequels ever made. Now, when Fury Road came out, and yes, I thought Fury Road was amazing, right? It made me want to go back and just check out the entire series, right? Now, if you go back to the first film, this movie, after watching something like The Road Warrior, Fury Road, and even Terrordome, the third Mad Max film, it is very jarring, right? And the reason for that is because the aesthetic is totally different. Right? Mad Max 2, 3, and 4, we got an apocalyptic wasteland, right? But when you jump back to Mad Max 1, there is absolutely no apocalyptic wasteland aesthetic to be seen whatsoever. Despite the promotions to this film saying the contrary. Like, for instance, read the back of this thing. It says, "In the ravaged near future." Right? And then it says here, cinematically define the post-apocalyptic landscape. And for me, like, I highly disagree with that. Now, it may have been promoted as that during that time when this movie came out, but in retrospect, especially after watching Fury Road, going back to this, you look at it and you're like, what the hell is this? It's a huge disappointment as far as aesthetics. It doesn't feel like Mad Max 2, 3, and 4 whatsoever. So this feels like an island within the franchise. And initially, when I saw this movie, I was like, what is this? This is kind of weak, right? I didn't like it at all. I mean, they say it's an apocalyptic wasteland, or they say it's a future, but there is absolutely nothing as far as aesthetic wise to make you feel like you're watching a science fiction film, right? Everybody dressed in normal clothes. As far as post-apocalyptic wasteland, like, there's no deserts, there's plenty of vegetation, there's trees, there's grass. And as far as the people, they have diners, they have gas stations, they have ice cream shops. So it just doesn't feel like that, right? And I dismissed this movie. I was like, this movie's nothing compared to Fury Road and The Road Warrior, right? But something happened. I walked away from this film and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept seeing these iconic scenes in my mind. And I kept thinking about him and thinking about him. And then I looked the film up and I saw, what was the big deal? Well, the big deal was that this was George Miller's first film, right? George Miller had never directed a movie before. He was a doctor. He wasn't even really into cinema. And he was given such a limited budget. Like, I think it was not even $500,000 at the time. And he made this. Now, under those circumstances, I think this film is amazing, right? But at the same time, we have to go in to watching a movie without the background, without all the history behind it. Judge the movie on its own merits. So I go back and I watch this film and I said, you know what? Let's treat this as a standalone movie. Forget comparing it to Mad Max Fury Road. Forget comparing it to The Road Warrior. Let's just judge the movie on its own merits. And when I did that, it hit me. I was like, man, this movie is amazing. Like, I love this movie. As soon as I was done watching it, I wanted to watch it again. And then when I would watch it again, I wanted to watch it another time. Because there's just so many awesome scenes in this movie. Now, if you just get past the whole, like, there's no apocalyptic future here, it's not a post-apocalyptic wasteland, it's not very science fiction-like as far as aesthetics. If you just put that aside and you judge the movie on its own merits, as an action film, this movie kicks ass. I think this movie has some of the best car chases in the history of cinema, right? I mean, you could say the same thing about The Road Warrior and Fury Road, right? But this right here, like that opening scene where they're chasing after the Knight Rider, like, I just can't stop thinking about that chase and the cars with the interceptors, and it's just high octane action. And to think that George Miller made this with barely any money as a first-time director, like, this is amazing, man. And then there's just so many iconic scenes like that come to mind. Just if somebody were to show you a picture, you would automatically say Mad Max. Like when you see the little shoe and the ball rolling on the road, you know that was the death of Mad Max's wife by the biker gang, right? And then just seeing Mad Max limping towards his interceptor, trying to go after Toe Cutter, the main villain. That's just such an iconic scene. And like I said, the chase with the Knight Rider. I mean, it's just, this movie's just unforgettable, and I love this movie. Now, I think that if you just put aside that this is not like some post-apocalyptic science fiction-y kind of movie, and you just judge it as an action film, judge it as a standalone film, I think it's more accessible, if you look at it that way, to a contemporary audience versus somebody that grew up with this, right? So if you're going to check out this film for the first time, please look at it like that. Don't compare it to Fury Road, because it's just totally unfair, right? You don't compare it to The Road Warrior, because it's just unfair. When The Road Warrior was being made, they gave George Miller millions of dollars, because this was one of the most successful films in the history of cinema. He barely had $500,000, and it made like tons of money, right? It was a phenomenon, and it was like lightning in a bottle. And so because of that, the producers gave George Miller tons of more money to make the sequels, right? So obviously they're going to be better as far as technical, from a technical point. And it's unfair to compare it like I did initially. Another franchise that I can make a comparison with is, like, say for instance, the El Mariachi series by Robert Rodriguez. El Mariachi, that was basically like a rough draft to the sequels to Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico, right? El Mariachi was barely made with any money, yet it was a smash hit because there was talent. You could see Robert Rodriguez's talent being illustrated, even though he had such a limited budget. But it was because of those limitations that he was able to shine. Same thing with George Miller for Mad Max, right? If you watch El Mariachi, it's like you cannot even compare it to the sequel, Desperado, which was totally Hollywood, had a huge production budget back behind it. Same thing with that one sequel, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Well, it's the same thing for Mad Max. Mad Max, now because this is a franchise, Mad Max almost looks like it's a rough draft, right? Like it's a rough draft. It was made barely with any money, but because it was a huge success, the sequels were able to basically be better as far as from a technical standpoint. Another comparison that I could kind of sort of make to it is like Evil Dead. For me, Evil Dead 1 was made with such a limited budget, but it was such a smash hit that Evil Dead 2 is like, to me, is like way better than Evil Dead 1. But I'm not going to put down Evil Dead 1 because Evil Dead 1 was made with a limited budget. And once that was a basically a smash hit, even though it was a small film with a limited budget, the sequel, Evil Dead 2, was going to be better because it had so much more money backing it up, and same thing with the third film, Army of Darkness. So that's just another comparison. But yes, coming back to Mad Max, I love this film. I just love the way that there are certain elements in the film that really are kind of similar to what we've seen in other films as far as the hero's journey. We have Mad Max, who he's basically an officer, right? And he's seen just how chaotic it is. He saw his comrade get basically cooked alive, and he's afraid. He doesn't want to continue that line of work, right? Despite being good at it, despite probably being the best police officer that can chase down these scumbags, right? And he tries to basically ignore the call to adventure or his destiny, and he, even though he's trying to avoid trouble ends up finding him, and his wife and child are murdered, and then he goes on that path for revenge, and he fully embraces his identity as the road warrior or whatever, right? So then he comes back to the fold and he gets his revenge on that biker gang, right? Now I just want to say one other thing about this, the disappointment that some people who are new to this franchise may have as far as it not being aesthetically post-apocalyptic. Just look at this movie as, because that's how I feel. I feel like when I look at this movie, it doesn't take place in some future where the apocalypse happened. For me, it's just about a biker gang, that this evil biker gang. I mean, and these guys are evil. I mean, they rape men, they rape women. Who knows what they would have done to Mad Max's kid? I mean, these people are just, they give animals a bad name. I hesitate to call them animals. They're just real evil people. And this movie's just about an evil biker gang terrorizing some small towns in the outskirts of Australia, right? And Mad Max is a cop, and him and his comrades, they're trying to stop them, but they're basically they're powerless because the system is corrupt and things are falling apart from a societal standpoint, right? Now, talking about the franchise as a whole, if you jump to the sequel, Road Warrior, the apocalypse has happened. And I think that's what makes it jarring watching this film comparing, and after you've watched the other three, it's jarring, right? Because the apocalypse happens off screen, right? I mean, you get a little introduction in the beginning of the Road Warrior that tells you what happened, but the apocalypse, it happens off screen. So what I would love to see from this franchise, I would love to see kind of like a Mad Max 1.5, like a movie that takes place in between Mad Max and the Road Warrior that shows Mad Max in the middle of the apocalypse. Like, I think that would be an amazing movie. Also, there's some things that are kind of unaddressed. Like, remember that at the end of this film, Mad Max's wife is still alive, right? I know I just said his wife died. So she was put on the brink of death by that biker gang. And you could kind of look at it like she's basically just a vegetable, right? But my point is this. I would love to see a movie with Mad Max being around, just experiencing the apocalypse, right? And giving one last goodbye to his wife, who is basically in a coma. I think her leg is missing, her arm is missing. She's just messed up. And I would love to just see that one last goodbye. Because when this movie ends, and then you jump to the Road Warrior, you kind of like, what happened to her? Like, obviously she's not going to be around anymore because she was brutalized, but still, I just kind of wish that I got to see Mad Max address that, right? So I think that would be an interesting film to see Mad Max in the middle between of Mad Max 1 and 2, and just see him there during the apocalypse, and just see, like, there's a story, there's so much storytelling potential right there for a movie. Like, I'd much rather see that than this Furiosa movie that they're coming out with. And I'm not saying I don't like Furiosa, but I just think, like, look, this is Mad Max. This series is Mad Max. I want movies about Mad Max. Now we're trying to, like, do a side movie involving Furiosa, and I'm just like, I don't know about that, man. I mean, sure, I'll check it out maybe when it comes out on Blu-ray, but I'm not too excited about it, right? But coming back to this movie, I love this movie. I thought the actors were amazing. This right here, this is the Scream Factory edition, and the reason why I prefer this edition is because it has the English dub. To anybody from Australia out there, I know there's you folks are purist. I know the Mad Max fans who are purists, they think it's blasphemous just to even listen to the English dub. But I'm sorry, the Australian accent could be pretty thick on this one for me. And I understood the movie a whole lot better listening to the American dub. And that's why I appreciate this edition, right? Because when I first saw it, I was just kind of like, huh? But then when I saw the this version with the English dub, I totally understood the film a whole lot better. So I recommend this edition right here. And yes, this is a film that I truly love with all my heart. Love the action, love the cars, and this movie really made me a big fan of muscle cars, right? And I just cannot praise this movie enough.
Another thing that I absolutely love about this film is that it's basically a Western, right? Because you deal with themes pertaining to the breakdown of society, murder, and vengeance. And I really love that. It's almost like I'm watching something like the Fistful of Dollars trilogy or the Man with No Name trilogy, starring Clint Eastwood and directed by Sergio Leone. Well, actually, that's kind of more applicable to the sequels, because in this film, Mad Max, we actually get the backstory to the character. But in the Fistful of Dollars trilogy, he is completely unknown. But the way that the character is thrown into a situation and says very little, and he's just kind of like in the middle of the situation, it's more applicable to the sequels. Now, another thing about this movie that I thought was just pretty revolutionary for its time was that this was the first Australian film to be shot in widescreen. So that's a really important technical achievement right there. And another important thing that this film did was that this movie introduced to the world Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson was a nobody, and he literally became a star overnight because of this. And just look at his career. Not only is he an amazing actor, but he's probably one of the best American directors ever. Like, even though his film directing resume is pretty small, each movie is like a masterpiece, right? So just going back and seeing Mel Gibson here as a nobody, so to speak, it's pretty amazing because he did an outstanding job. Now, I absolutely love the opening chase in this movie. It really just blows me away and is one of the best car chases in the history of cinema for me. And the Ford Falcon V8 Interceptor is just amazing, right? Like I said in the introduction to this video, it really made me a fan of muscle cars, and seeing the Interceptors try to chase down the Holden Monero Pursuit Special, and seeing the cars smash through other cars, and that iconic scene with the little kid in the middle of the road and just seeing the cars just barely miss him. I mean, iconic scenes, man, and it's just an amazing chase sequence, and I love hearing the roar of the engines. Love it, man. This movie is just pure octane, gas guzzling action, man. If you love cars and you love car chases, you owe it to yourself to watch the original Mad Max. And to think that George Miller was able to make this film for like half a million, or I think it's actually like $350,000, is just insane, right? What he achieved was amazing. And his background is being a doctor, and so he was exposed to a lot of road accidents, a lot of deaths from car accidents. So this was some of the inspiration that he drew upon for the film Mad Max. Now, I also have to say that the acting from Mel Gibson and Joanne Samuel as his wife in this film was excellent. They are totally believable as a couple, and it was very, I felt something, right? It resonated with me on an emotional level when she nearly got killed and when their child got killed. But that moment when she's laying in the hospital bed, just basically as a vegetable with severed limbs, and Mel Gibson is just standing outside the door. And the nurse says he's standing there like a zombie all day. And you just see in his eyes, like he's just, not only is he just consumed by rage and the sentiments of revenge, but he just can't believe what he's lost. Like, he tried to get away from the lifestyle of being a police officer and engaging against these scumbags, right? Against some of the worst criminals, right? He wanted to abandon that life and fully commit to the life of a husband and a father. And it was just taken from him, right? He tried to avoid trouble, but trouble sought him out. And you could see him consumed by not only revenge, but by self-loathing and sadness and yeah, it's a really powerful scene, and I really think that the acting between those two was outstanding. I think they were a great on-screen couple, and I was sad. Yeah, I was genuinely sad when she nearly died. I mean, technically she kind of did die, man, because she's just a vegetable, right? And things will never be the same. And yeah, great acting from Hugh Bryan as the main villain, Toe Cutter, who comes back in Fury Road as the main villain many years later. I mean, the dude was outstanding, right? I mean, he was totally insane, but at the same time, fully in control of his gang, and he operated with pure evil intentions, right? He was doing it on purpose. All right, and it was all totally calculated, and he has so many iconic scenes and so many iconic lines of dialogue. I totally love it, right? Also, Steve Bisley, who plays Goose, was great, and so was Tim Burns, who played Johnny. And that sequence at the very end, where Mad Max basically handcuffs him to the car that's about to explode and just leaves behind a saw and says, you got 5 minutes. If you saw your arm off or leg off, you could be free within 5 minutes. That right there, that scene literally inspired the horror franchise Saw. Like, and the filmmakers of that series totally admit that. And again, it was an amazing, iconic scene. Back in 1979, you saw that, you were like, holy shit, that's ruthless. And now we look at it and we're like, oh, okay, things are tame in comparison to what we see today. But if you just give it context, I mean, all this stuff was amazing. Again, especially for a first-time director. And, when we see the V8 Interceptor, the Ford Falcon, the Pursuit Special, Max's special black, Pursuit Special car, man, that thing is sexy, man. And we are introduced to it early in the film, and Max doesn't drive it until the very end, until he gets that revenge of his. But you know when you see it early on in the film that it's a total foreshadowing that this thing is going to be put into use. And when it does, it's going to be a moment in which Mad Max is a total badass, which is exactly what happens when Max goes out to seek revenge against Toe Cutter and his gang. You know when you see that V8 Pursuit Special hit the road, you know that it's on and that Max is going to raise hell. Now, I will continue to maintain my argument that this is not necessarily a post-apocalyptic film as much as it is a film about the social decay, right? The breakdown of society. I mean, this is especially evident when the police, Goose especially, Goose and Max, they find the couple that's been raped by Toe Cutter and his gang, and they're able to apprehend Johnny, and Johnny is basically let go, right? Because no witnesses showed up during the trial, so they basically just let him go scot-free, and Goose is furious, and ultimately this leads to Goose also, I mean, he basically dies even though he's still alive. It's just like Max's wife, right? Even though they're still alive, they're dead. They're not the same. They're vegetables, and Goose basically gets burned to a crisp. He's still alive, but it's like Max said. He says, I don't care what you say. That's not Goose, right? But my point is that this is a film about the decay of society. You see that the lawyers don't care about the couple. They don't care if the woman was raped, the boyfriend was raped, the evidence. The witnesses didn't show up, so Johnny has to be set free. Goose is furious about this, and this leads to an exchange of insults between Goose and Johnny, which will ultimately lead to Johnny and Toe Cutter's gang taking revenge on Goose. And it's just showcasing the breakdown of society. And the reason why I bring it up is because, man, I see this today in contemporary American society, right? It's ridiculous, right? I don't want to get into real world examples, but you could just look at your local news channel and you see a lot of injustices. You see a lot of terrible criminals being let go because of whatever political correctness, or because these judges don't follow the law. They want to be activists or whatever, right? And same thing with the lawyers. Same thing with the district attorneys. You see a lot of district attorneys in America right now that are not doing their jobs. They're not persecuting criminals. And this movie totally reminded me of that, right? The breakdown of society, social decay. And this film was truly ahead of its time in this regard, because even though the film doesn't feel futuristic to me on an aesthetic level, when it comes to this, I mean, you just think this came out in 1979. I mean, this was a total foreshadowing of literally the future as the contemporary society that we got going on, which was the future then. So it hit it on the nail in regards to this. Now, I have to say, in regards to the cinematography, I love the way that this film is shot. It's beautiful. There's some sequences here that are pure cinema. The cinematography by David Egby was just out of this world. There's a shot that I particularly love. It's when Toe Cutter has the shotgun in Johnny's mouth, and they're basically walking into the lake, or I don't know if that's the sea, and you just see the sun reflecting off the water, and Toe Cutter's just basically threatening Johnny, like not to be a snitch or something like that. But that shot is just beautiful. And then there's other shots too. All the way these car chases are filmed is just breathtaking, right? I just love it, man. I feel like I'm in those muscle cars myself, in those pursuits, and you just got like there's sequences like night shots with the fog and the lighting that is just beautiful. Now I know that I've mentioned that this film has certain aspects that they borrow from that classic archetype, the hero's journey, and then there's elements that kind of feel like a western. And I also want to add that there is a portion of this film that feels like a chase movie, right? Something like, like Jason in Friday the 13th, he's coming after you. Or maybe like Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, where the guy's trying to get home to his woman and his child who are left behind in the well, and he's trying to get there before while he's in pursuit by the Mayan king's men, or who are trying to hunt him down. Like that, there's that chase element when Toe Cutter and his gang are in pursuit of Max's wife. Like there's like 20 minutes in the film, and it does a really good job because the film turns into a chase film, right? And then it transitions into a revenge film. So I really love that this movie is like a fusion of different genres, but at the heart of it, we have something like the hero's journey and a modern day Western, or modern for the time. And I cannot continue to recommend and praise this film enough. I just can't get over the fact that just what George Miller was able to achieve with such a limited budget. From the cars, the technical aspects of the car chases, the stunts, the gore effects. I mean, it's just amazing. I highly recommend this film. This movie is outstanding. And like I said in the introduction, don't compare it to the other 3 films in this franchise. The other 3 films were major studio productions. This was just a super small independent film that was lightning in a bottle, right? No one knew this thing was going to spawn this big franchise, right? So you can't compare it to the other 3 films. It's just unfair, right? But when you sit back and you look at this film on its own merits as a standalone movie, this thing is great. I love this movie. I cannot recommend it enough. I give it an A+. Thank you guys for listening to this review and analysis. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, people. One love.